Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I think good evening to you, Paul, over in Blighty, because I'm still in Costa Rica. How you doing?
Just late afternoon, just gone 5:15 here. So,
Quarter
and
past one.
it's lighter. It's not as beautiful and as light and as sunny as where it is for you, but it's still a little light outside, which is
It
great.
is
So it's all
nice.
quite encouraging here on the very last day of January, the month
Yes.
that never seems to end but is about to. So,
Well,
yeah, not
that's
too
why I
bad. It's
stayed
quite nice
away.
today.
Yeah. I'm pleased that's why I left it. I think January is such a depressing month. It's a long month, it's a cold month. We're all white and pasty, we're all broke because of Christmas, we're all fat because of Christmas. So I try and escape. But yeah, I'm homeward bound tomorrow. I'm actually really looking forward to it because although it's lovely and I look a bit bedraggled because I've just been for a swim, my
Yeah.
last swim before I go home. But the heat, it's just I'm not used to it, and we're not used to it. Oh, we come into this massive, these tropical climates, and it's just too hot because you can't do anything apart from sit by the pool or go in air conditioning. And I don't like sitting in air conditioning because I think it's a bit bonkers. Or go by the sea, beautiful sea. Especially if
Hmm.
you're a surfer. The seas here are all like wavy, so it's very popular for surfers. That's what they come. But anyway, enough of that because my goodness me, we've got so much to talk about. And as we just said, you were humming the sound of a siren. Um, uh,
Yeah,
there you go.
I
And I
was.
said that's the old siren, and then we went straight on to
It's
talk
because
about
I'm in love with the
bells.
police state, Karen. That's why I'm even singing the songs of the police state. Everybody sing along to the sound of a police silent siren. Yeah,
But it's moved. It's moved. And then we started talking about bells, didn't we? And we said, oh, there's a thing about bells, Tartaria, and we could just go on. And every subject you mentioned, there's history to it, isn't there? Which is just fascinating. But I'm going to try and keep us on track with this one about really a follow up on what we were talking last. I
yeah.
remember biblical stuff. You remember, this is where I fail, you see, because I forget it all goes into somewhere. Whereas you guys know exactly what you remember, the dates, the times, the names, the places, and all the history, which is so fantastic. So I think what we need to address is in the interim, I've had a chat with allegedly Dave, which was really fascinating and very interesting because he put a comment
Yeah.
on one of our chit chats, and then you've come back and and added more comments. And I think it's not a competition here, is it? It's all about the truth, maybe how we all discern the truth. For anybody watching, listening, or wants to make a comment about this, including you, Dave, if you're going to watch this. But I think how do you want to address that? What Dave's comment? I mean, where do we go? I mean, being nice to each other, obviously, because we're all very nice people.
It's challenging, isn't it? But uh, I think in the end, of course, this is people might hear this as a kind of cop out or something, but it's true. Everybody has to really and does, whether they like it or not, come to a decision today about what their view is. We're always doing that all the time. You can't do anything else but that. And I think that that's really the key. I mean, my sort of approach is I think I might have said it before. I'm seeking to be less wrong tomorrow than I was yesterday. That's the aim. It doesn't always work that way. And I guess once you've been down a path of learning any particular field, you become a glass more than half full with certain things, and it does get more and more awkward to shift your view. And in some cases, that's a good thing because, if you've got a lot of corroborating evidence for the line that you're suggesting, let me put it that way, it's going to be difficult for people to move you away from that view without providing evidence. I mean, that goes for any sort of field of study, I think. And then you get down to disputing what is genuine evidence or not. And of course, it can all sort of get a little bit pear-shaped. So I'm not sort of too heated or anxious about the whole thing. I think it's just that I've got a certain narrative to communicate. It will either strike a chord with listeners and intrigue them possibly, or motivate them or propel them to new sort of ways of thinking about things, or it won't. And I think you can't do anything. It's just like a salesman's job, some you win, some you lose, move on. And I think that's really the way it is. But there's definitely a mood in the world, or certainly in my world, of inquiring more fully into these things because this is the time, it appears to me, when everything is up for grabs and when the level of questioning and the quality of questioning, certainly courtesy of our use of the internet, has just kept going up and up and up. And that's what makes it very exciting. It's also a slightly anxious time because to some degree, as people see more and more of the hitherto hidden picture, they become aware of dangers which they didn't know about prior to that, and it suddenly gets a much more sort of detailed and slightly alarming world, because you realize that there really is evil in it, and it's organized. It's a combination really of evil and stupidity, in my view. I don't know which is the worst, but the the end effects of them are pretty poor. So that's kind of what
Yeah.
we're all trying to get to deal with. I think most people
I,
have a
I,
sense that life should be being managed way better than it is, and I'm completely in agreement with that. And everybody's also, I think, realizing that you cannot hand that responsibility. Oh, it has to be removed from the people that want it. The people that want it, those that want to be in power, like the political class, for example, are not suited to hold it. And before, people couldn't see why. Now, with the questioning and with a real sort of probing into history, people are beginning to have a much more sort of detailed and coherent view of that. And that's what's making the difference. People are now informed in a way, or have educated themselves in a way, where they can see it. They can see that they can see the problems. They can see them in detail, and they can articulate them to others. And this is what's making this time such a rich time, in terms of thought and communication and all that stuff that goes with it.
well said. And I think it is very interesting times. It's biblical times, isn't it? Which I think we would all agree on. And I think what is also important to understand is the Bible, because both you and Dave and many other people that are on this path of bringing the truth to the fore, or looking at the truth, many people seem to be in agreement that the Bible holds a lot of the keys to this, but it's how we interpret it, and that's where the confusion comes. And I think when people, sometimes they come to me, or they put comments, or just generally you might meet a mate and they say, well, what's the answer? What's going on? Something's not right. What is the solution? And the solution, really, I always say, it starts within. Nobody's going to come and save us, whether you think it's, a knight in shining armor, maybe Jesus, maybe Mr. Donald Trump, who knows? But the main thing is it comes from within us. And somebody put a comment about, if you're not in the chosen person, the chosen group of people, whoever that might be, does that mean
Mm-hmm.
everybody else is, what am I going to say, up with and I'm saying no, of course not, because again, it goes back to within yourself, and whoever the chosen group of people is, they're not better than anybody else. They've got a job to do. We've all got jobs to do. But if we stay within our group, within our breeding, when you've alluded to dogs, you've compared it to, like, different breeds of dogs. If we stay within those groups, then work can be done, and we go back to the garden, quotation marks, of Eden. We go to a happy place. Is that it, kind of in a nutshell?
I guess, sort of.
You can say no.
it's
You
it's
can
true.
say no.
Well, it's tricky. No, it's tricky. You touch on. I mean, you're getting my view, right? And so it's down to everybody to distill it. But the challenge is it possible to read a document? In this case, we're talking about the Bible, and to really fully understand what it's saying. Churches, of course, have. It's not that they've always been the way they are right now, but now they're so far away from in my view, a long, long way away from the core teaching or instruction within the book, that they are, they're effectively have become wolves in sheep's clothing. And they focus on really the trite and secondary and third level aspects of it, in my view, all the singing and dancing and all this kind of stuff. I'm not against that, by the way, but it's a bit like putting, the cart before the horse. It's lost its focus, and you only have to look at the behavior of people in organized religions, and most normal people, thankfully, are completely put off, and they should be, because these institutions are not really demonstrating their understanding of scripture, in my view. They can talk in a very refined and intellectual way. Many of these priests, or whatever name they go under, come out of seminaries and teaching colleges and all this, that, and the other. So they've got a very deep and detailed understanding of it. But somehow in the process of communicating it, they miss the meat of the matter. It's almost as if the intellectualization of it, and this does take place, kills it dead. It's meant for the layman, in my view, and I'm only really interested in the layman because I think that that's where all the best Christian behavior takes place. And the word Christian, of course, makes people shudder a bit, and rightly so. I mean, I don't know if you've been I haven't been on the London Underground for years, but when I was working in London a lot in the 80s and through into the early 90s, one would often find these fresh-faced young types with a guitar coming up and wanting to talk to you about Jesus. And of course I didn't, not with them. I really did not want to do that because you're getting there's a lot of other stuff coming with it. So my thing is to try and understand what that book means. And like I think I mentioned in a previous show, it is a contract because testament comes from the Greek word diatheke, and that word means contract. And contracts are, I mean, I'm sort of answering what you were saying a couple of minutes ago or responding to it. Contracts are exclusive, and they're exclusive not because I say so, but because they are. That's what a contract is. It's an exclusive agreement between two or more parties to do and or refrain from doing the things that are detailed in the contract. And maybe we touched upon this in a show previously, but repetition is key with this to sort of get points across. So the thing about contracts is if you're on it, you're in it. And if you're not on it, you're not in it. So it's exclusionary. So what this says, or what the Bible is saying, what this book is saying is, this book is only for the people that are on the contract. It's not for anybody else. Other people outside of it can pick it up. A bit like finding a contract in somebody's discarded briefcase. You could read it if you like, but if you're not on it, you've got nothing to do with it. You're not part of the agreement. And the question before us, and the question, of course, in part that allegedly Dave was addressing, is who are the people on the contract? Who are the parties to the contract? That's my language anyway. And you'll find it somewhere in Hebrews. I can't quote you chapter and verse, and there's a couple of other places. But the key phrase is that Yahweh says that he is basically the party of the first part. He's the chief partner in this contract. Let's put it that way. And the other party is his people. And then the question is, who are his people? So as I've mentioned, prior, and as your recent interview with Dave also covered, it's not the Edomites. Let's put it that way. It just isn't. And there's masses of evidence for that, which is probably not known by the wider audience. I don't mean necessarily here, but just the public in large are not familiar with this as a topic. They don't even really know that this sort of way of questioning it exists, but it's absolutely the best way to go about it, to just try and break down the words and what do they actually mean. And there are some very confusing words or very intentionally placed there inside the Bible, which assist with maintaining a confusion on the part of the reader. One of them is Gentile. No individuals are Gentiles. Gentiles is like an ethnicity. It's a nation unto itself. So when you get things like Paul goes to the Gentiles, what he's actually going to is all the dispersed Israelite people to go and take the message, which is the law is restored, basically. That's what it's about. You've got to get back online with the law. And many people have a go at St. Paul. I understand why, but I'm not one of them. But I don't really want to talk about him today because it's very detailed. But that he was part of that mission, not the only person. Of course, when they go to the Greeks and these other people think, oh, who are these people? Well, they're all Israelite people. All of these people are the dispersions of Israelites out of that part of the world. And those dispersions began 700 and 800 BC, way before Christ arrives, to put the law back on track, which is what his mission's about. Because he states that quite clearly. I've not come to do away with the law. I've come to fulfill it. And people don't read all these things that Christ said, but there's some really strong stuff in there, like I will set father against split families asunder because they won't get in line with the law. It's quite heavy stuff, So it's not a lovely book all the way through. People want to think it is. And in my view, churches emphasize that loveliness of it all. I'm not against that. I don't want you to get me wrong. I'm not some sort of mawk about it, but it's incomplete. There are other aspects to it. So the whole of the book is about these people who are known as the tribes of Israel. That's what it's all about, from Genesis down, from Adam and Eve all the way through. The bloodlines are very, very important. And this is why you get those huge sections in the Old Testament where you've got the begatting pages. I guess you've heard of those, or somewhere. You
Yes,
remember seeing them?
yes. So
Yeah,
yes, so and so begat
yeah,
so and so begat. Yeah, I got bored. I think that's why I didn't read the Bible.
yeah. I love all that begatting stuff. Can you remember all the names? No, no. And then it drones on and on and on and on. You go, what's this all about? Why are they doing this? Because bloodlines are vitally important. So, and I saw a question on one of the comments, and I can understand people squeamish about it, but I'm just saying back. You can say that I'm interpreting it wrong. I'm convinced. Let me put it that way, that I'm not. The bloodlines are massively important. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in there. And this is because racial purity is important in the Bible. And I think there are specific fundamental reasons for that, because the races are different. If they weren't, they wouldn't exist. I mean, if it weren't designed the way it is, or it isn't the way it is, the way it is as we see it, and the Creator has arranged it in whatever way, for whatever reason, I can't tell you, that there are fundamentally different types of human beings down here. And it's not just on the outside. It's really, the outside is like a signal of the way people work on the inside. This is my take on it. So you have these national characteristics of people. You have tribes within races, and they're very distinct. They certainly are amongst our race. You know, we don't get on too well with the French, do we? Maybe we love them. I don't know. But history of the last 1,000 years with the French has not been that hot. And so on and so forth. You get these disputes amongst interracial, as it were, disputes. But a primary theme of the Bible is no mixing of blood. And this is why Esau, going back to the birth of Jacob and Esau, this is why Esau was a grief unto his mother, because he was bearing children by Canaanite women and Hittite women. He was just running amok, right? And it broke her heart, basically, in modern language. She couldn't stand it. And she didn't want him to have the birthright, him being the eldest. He's supposed to pick up the birthright from his father Isaac. And there's a whole deceit that takes place there to deceive Isaac, to give the birthright to Jacob, which fundamentally was the right thing to do because Esau was a ruin. He ultimately had Canaanite blood in him and all sorts of other things that were going on. And his behavior was not good. By their fruits shall ye know them. And he spurned his birthright. He couldn't care less about it. In fact, the phrase, you'd sell your soul for a mess of pottage, something like that. You must have heard that.
Yes, yes.
Pottage being a lentil stew. The incident in the Old Testament is that he was running back home, having killed someone. I can't remember who. Certainly in other aspects of it, he'd slaughtered someone. And he bumps into his brother Jacob, and he's really hungry. And the gist of it is, Jacob says to him, if I make you some food, will you give me your birthright? He goes, yeah. He couldn't care less about it. It was of absolutely no interest to him at all. He didn't have any pride in it. It wasn't something that was going to be of any use to him. He was just out for debauchery and killing and stuff. He was a bit of a, that's the way he was.
Label.
And that's where that phrase comes from, to give up practically everything you own just for a bowl of soup. And he did, So that is actually the base of this conflict that's in the world, this spiritual war in its modern phase, i.e. the last 2,500, 3,000 years, maybe a bit longer than that. That's the essence of it. Two brothers, ostensibly, but very, very different. And at war with one another, or that's what it has developed into. And all of these characteristics of Esau, who is therefore the father of the Edomites, that's where they get the name from. They lived in Idumea, Edom, which was south of Judea, where the Judahites lived, not the Jews. The Judahites lived in Judea. This is where this conflict comes from, in that part of the world. And what the book is about, the Old Testament, is the history of these Israelite people, about how they flourish and fulfill the letter of the contract in when they do the right things, everything comes to them. And when they go whoring after other gods, as Moses found when he came down found them running around a golden calf, it goes to dog shit, to use a modern British colloquialism. And that's exactly what happens. And it gets worse than that. It's very, very bad. So the lesson really is you're in a contract whether you like it or not. And, so many people will go, oh, yeah, we're the chosen people and all this. And I've heard it from all over the place. Think it's a really, really great thing. It should be, but it's not a really, really great thing if you fail to adhere to the terms of the contract. And one of them is you don't go whoring after other gods. And we live in a civilization that's doing that right now. People have made sport their gods and booze their gods and gambling their gods and whoring their. All of these things are going. I sound like Mary Whitehouse, don't I? Oh, don't you like a bit of fun? Of course, we all grow up as young men and we make mistakes and do things. Of course, I didn't make any mistakes, Karen. Everything went perfect for me. But you've got to keep the terms of the contract. Then it starts to work. But I've likened it to, it's a responsibility. There are certain qualities that these people possess, these Israelite people possess, which have been imbued in them. They've been created this way by the Creator to effectively work for him, with him, to deliver the law into the world. And they're under certain strict conditions. And one of them is you cannot allow aliens to live with you. You can't allow that. Of course, it has been allowed. It all depends who you think these people are. I'm quite clear it's the white Caucasian people. So me getting together with allegedly Dave, I don't think would be necessarily too constructive, not in this sort of a format. And I'm quite clear about it because the marks of Israel, that is the signifying characteristics which would help you to identify these people today, are too numerous to list almost with regards to the white Caucasian people. In fact, there's a video out there called 100 Proofs Why the White People Are the Lost Tribes of Israel. There's 100. There's a lot more than that. I've got tons of them all over the place, but the 100's good enough. And if anybody wants to go there, there's a video, and I think there's even a document for it. It's called truthvids.net. And it's all about the migrations of our ancestors from that part of the world. And I think it's the movement of the people that creates a little bit of confusion with identifying who these people may be. You need to know quite a bit about that for the picture to get clearer and clearer the more you look at it. For example, I spoke with someone else years ago, a guy from Texas who was basically saying the same stuff that Dave was saying to you the other day. And he pointed out to me, he said, if you look in Northern Africa, you'll find all these towns on these old maps named after Jerusalem and places like that. I said, oh, that's very interesting. So I went off and looked and did a bit of research. And so your first impression may be, it is the people of that continent that this refers to. But it isn't, to put it bluntly, because you need to understand the behavior of the Israelite people as they moved around. And wherever they went, they left the same names for towns all over the place. There's a lot of Jerusalems when you look into it. There's a lot of them. They're all over the place. And the story I'm going to say is the one I believe closest to the truth here. Always open to having my mind changed. But when the migrations out of that part of the world were many, they were varied. And as I said, they began at least 700 to 800 BC. This is why the Greeks are Israelites and all these other nations moving up from that part of the world. There was a continuous sort of movement out of there. And about 80% of them, 90% of them, as Josephus details in his books, a Judahite historian. He wrote a book called The Wars of the Judahites. It's actually misnamed The War of the Jews. This is a very confusing word, Jew, and it's part of this sort of masquerade, this obfuscation about who is the real people. Josephus noted that there was a colossal number of Israelites heading north, and they passed up through the Caucasus Mountains, And that pass is still there to this day. It's called the Pass of the Israelites. And there were so many, I think there's about 2 million of them walked up there. It's something like that, huge numbers. And they wore it down. You know those nature documentaries you see with Richard Attenborough, where you see the gnus or the wildebeest going across Africa, and just they've gone in a line, and it's like 2 feet deep is the trench that they've walked in. Well, it's like that, and it's still there to this day. I mean, I may mention this on a previous show, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but because I can't remember everything that we covered 3 weeks ago. But that's where the Caucasians get their name. That's why you're referred to as a Caucasian, because we migrated up and through, or in great numbers in that time of history, through the Caucasus. And I think I've also mentioned, this thing about leaving names everywhere. It's all over the place once you've got the key to start looking. So Dan, I think I've mentioned this before, but sorry for repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. Dan, the tribe of Dan, were said to move around the earth like a snake. That means all over the place. The way that a snake appears, you don't know quite where it's going to go next. And they did. And they left their name everywhere. So they move up through the Dardanelles. They travel on the river Danube. They settle in the Mark of Dan, Dan's Mark, Denmark. North of Denmark, you've got Jutland, Judahite land, which is another connective point. You've then got the word Hebrew. Everybody's heard of that word. Well, Spain's national airline is Iberia. That's Hebrew. Over in Russia, you've got Siberia or Siberia. Again, the same root word. You've got in Scotland, north of Scotland, you've got the Hebrides. It's all over the place, but you've got to have the key to look at it. These are keys in all these names, and they are considerable. There's a huge amount of evidence for this. So it's the linguistic and written histories. That's all we can go on. We don't have anything else. Plus evidence in terms of archaeology, which is coming forth all the time to support this effectively suppressed narrative. And that's what leads me conclusively, I'm unshakable in this, right? Because nobody else even comes close. I heard what Dave said about the slavery thing. For me, that doesn't apply. That period actually took place about 700 BC. There's a 400-year period for the Israelites then when they were taken into captivity. It's about 430 years. And that's what that applies to. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, although we are aware, of course, of the African slave trade, I went up and checked it because it was interesting what he said with regards to starting in 1619, although there was probably quite a bit of activity before that. The truth is that although that is a terrible incident in slavery, it's not the only one. And in fact, there have been far more white European descendants of Israelite people enslaved, like by a considerable factor by Barbary corsairs and pirates and all this kind of stuff. There's a massive trade in that. So the history of enslavement is considerable. And I would even suggest, although people, of course, might not go for this, that we're currently enslaved right now. It's just much more subtle. It's a much more subtle enslavement using manipulated law, all sorts of psychological warfare, which has been learned over hundreds, if not thousands of years. Rulers have learned how to effectively corral our minds in many ways. And of course, that's what's made the internet such a boon to people like us who have always had this internal itch, but didn't know how to scratch it. And now we've been able to scratch quite a bit and get a lot of the dust off, and the picture's getting clearer all the time. So, I mean, it's a vast topic, simply because there are a huge number of books, many written out of Britain, that cover this, but most people don't know that these books even exist. They're just completely, where did you get that book from? Well, you have to really dig deep. And many of them were actually made available as PDFs about 15, 20 years ago on the net. And now it's getting very difficult to find them again. So it's like a window opened. You had to dive in and get hold of the stuff. But I know people who are archivists who keep collections of these things. And I guess it's difficult for people because I guess to some degree, it makes for quite dry reading. Although my experience, it was anything but, because I found it electrifying because I'm reading about the history of my people. and it all adds up. I mean, today I was, did I send you something over about this as well? I don't know if I'd actually put something in. I did, yes. I was talking to somebody else about language. There was a thing about language in the Bible, and it says that a new language will come about. It's in Isaiah. You'll speak with a new tongue. I'm going to suggest that that's English, because English has become the language of the world. And it could only become the language of the world because the people that spread that language, there's also a mark, it's like a prophecy of what they would be like, that they would populate the four corners of the earth. That's to keep the flat earth people happy, right? They would go and populate the whole earth. Well, who did that? It's not rocket. It's not rocket science to work it out. It's us, or it's our people that did that. No one else did that. And it says that wherever they go, they will just grow food all the time. Well, effectively, they would be a blessing to the people around them. I know that that's not always the case. I'm not naive, right? I know that colonialism has got some hellishly stupid and murderous parts to it. But if you look at the history of Anglo-Saxon farmers or Celtic farmers, and we're all included, the Gaels, the Celts, Scandinavians, Teutons, the lot, right? It's all part of this extension of the tribes. The production of food we're pretty hot on this stuff. We're pretty good at it. And it's because of that we fed the world almost in a way. I mean, the breadbasket in America is amazing and has been. Of course, they've got their own problems right now. But there's so many multiple little comments like that with regards to this narrative that just take time to be digested and understood. And in a sort of conversation space like this, although we can hit on some high marks, and I think we're trying to do that to get the main points across, nothing can beat reading about it. It has to be, I do believe that. And not just the Bible, but really to try and find authors, and I don't have any in mind right now, but I can do that maybe for a future show, and documents that would assist in creating a more contextual understanding of what we're talking about. Because it takes a few little details, I think, for the cogs to fit together, and then you'll get a picture. I mean, when I first stumbled across this in 2012, because my path, I don't know if I'd even talked about this, but my path into it came from banking, which is really weird. It's a bit weird, right? Even when I look back on it, but I had a bee in my bonnet about banking, still do. And that led me to trying to inquire about what is honest weights and measures. The Bible talks about this stuff, honest weights and measures, and that you are not to take too much in trade. You're not supposed to be a rank profiteer. And this led me to the Bible, which led me to looking into Babylonian interest systems. Babylon's where interest, as far as we know, first arrived in the world, courtesy of some demons, I think one of the narratives go, that taught the Israelite people who were there about this. And that's another very interesting part of the history of these people. When they were taken off into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, it wasn't just Judahites that went there. There were Idumeans, i.e. Edomites, were taken along with them. And although this is tenuous, and I can't prove this, I suspect that it was these Idumeans that learnt this dark magic in these temples and have therefore been the masters of money on the earth ever since, or certainly the predominant player to a huge degree. And of course, most people that you speak to today don't know that they're mystified by how central banks work, but they are. Most of our politicians are mystified by it, or if they're not mystified by it, they certainly don't say anything truthful about it. So, I mean, I've slightly gone off beam with it, but the banking, although it's a core part of biblical law, the banking led me to the Bible. And I remember when I came across one document on this, it was like a bingo moment. I just went bang. It's suddenly, for me personally, everything about all that puzzlement that I used to hear when I was a little kid in church, it just disappeared. And it became a very plain and direct and much more powerful document because of it. Once that sort of mystical, dreamy sort of way of communicating that many people in the churches have about it had gone, I thought, wow, this is really something else. And it became very real as a history book of the trials and tribulations of these people And their trials and tribulations are simply measured by the degree to which they obey the law or not. And the other thing about it is that I would suggest, as an evidence to reinforce the pitch I'm making here, I don't really believe it's a pitch, but I'm just using this language, is this war between the Edomites and the Israelites, which is really what is going on in the world. Now, the Edomites know it. They know that this is the case. They're conscious of it. Our people, the European people, are clueless about it in a great degree. They think something else. They wouldn't even think that anything is going on in that way, because they've been given this kind of dreamy view of the book, courtesy of the infiltration of churches. It wasn't always that way, but they have. But given that the other side know that it's us, you would say, well, their behavior would reinforce that. Well, it does, because the one people, I hope you get away with this on YouTube. I'm trying to use my language properly,
Yes,
okay?
you're doing very well.
But this is not me speaking. I'm just speaking from historical records on all the documents I've got from the other side, right? This is in their own writing, okay? Is that wherever we have gone, they have always followed and have always worked, tragically, to undermine what's been built. And this is a lot of times. A lot of times. And even coming back to the African slave trade, what needs to be known is that 90% of it was owned and managed by Jewish people out of Portugal, headed up by a guy called Aaron Lopez. He was the big one. And Newport in America, where many of them docked, became known as Jewport for the simple reason that the whole industry was run by them. And this is nothing new. It's not a historical fabrication. They were the main slave merchants, mopping up behind the Roman army after battles and things. It's just a tradition. This is what they've done for a long time. I'm not casting aspersions. It's just a matter of historical record. You can look it up. This is not to say that white guys didn't get involved in slavery. They did, right? But I think the history of the British, and this may sound weak to certain ears, is it's a bit like we took up smoking to symbolize slavery, didn't do it for very long and packed it in. Because we didn't spend a long time doing it. And you have to also understand that the hand of the Edomite is very strong in that industry. Now, there's a book in the States called The Secret, I think it's called The Secret Relationship Between Jews and Muslims, or something like that. I've forgotten. It was by, I think it's Louis Farrakhan's organization about it. And they looked into the whole operations of the African slave trade. Of course, it's another book that's not well, and I've mullered the title, so I apologize. Anybody that looks it up, they'll find it. It's just, I don't have a copy. I've just got PDFs floating around somewhere. That's why you should have physical books, because I could have looked and looked at the bookcase and given it to you. But they discovered, rightly, who was really fully in charge of the slave trade. And it was the Edomite people. And so obviously the Edomites in America didn't like that too much. And that's part and parcel about why they've had such grief over there with all that kind of stuff. But it's just true. So I'm not trying to absolve bad white people from any guilt that they're due. It's true. But the thing is that slavery has been an institution on the earth for thousands and thousands of years. This is not in defense of it. It's an observation of it. And the slave trade in Africa could not have taken place without the compliance of African tribes, because they were already enslaving one another before the white guys got there. And it would have been impossible for it to operate because white Europeans could not go into Africa. They literally physically could not go in, because if they went in, they would catch tropical diseases and die. It was as simple as that, you know. We're talking the early 1600s when this thing kicked off. Of course, it built up at a rate of knots. But they couldn't go in there. They would just die. So they were reliant upon, or struck agreements with, tribes in there that were already enslaving other tribes, and they would march them out of Central Africa to the coast, where they would be picked up and taken on that hellish voyage across the Atlantic, where I believe something like, I don't know, 15% of them died. It's about 2 million, something like that, out of 12 million transported. Died. And it's not good. No one's saying it's good. But that's what happened. That's really what happened. And I know when Wilberforce finally stopped slavery, with the loss of about 3,500 British sailors who stopped it. So the Royal Navy was called in and spent several years doing it. 3,500 men died, Englishmen died, stopping this, which is another fact that most people don't know. There were 2 letters of complaint received by Queen Victoria, both from African tribes leaders who were moaning like mad that they were going to lose lots of money. One of them said, I've got 5,000 slaves here on the dockside ready to go. And if you stop this tomorrow, I'm going to have to kick him into the harbour. Literally, that's what it said. Right? I can't remember his name. I don't have the documents in front of me, but you can go look this stuff up. I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just pointing out it's not this one-sided gibberish that we get through the mainstream media. Nothing is, right?
Let me just come in here, Paul, because
Yeah.
just because if I could just sit here and listen to everything you say, because it's great, because you've evidenced it, haven't you? You've done the research, and I think what happens with a lot of us is we don't do the research. That's why these little chit chats, whoever I'm speaking to, are so important, because it's bringing information to the front line, to the fore, so we can go and do our own research if there's any books left, because books are so important. If you have got any, hold on to them, stick them in the attic or something, because we've already had a burning of the books scenario, haven't we, in historic terms. But I think what happens is people love to watch other people, and because you've got the advent of the television, and now you've got all the computers and the phones and the laptops and all this sort of stuff, we're very happy to watch stuff. Me in particular, I love it. I love watching a Netflix movie every night. I don't believe it all, because I think they tell us stuff you have to look outside the actual story and see what information they're bringing forward, because a lot of it is lies, it's drama, but we like to watch it. And I'm thinking, let's talk about, we won't talk about it, but I'm just going to mention the Holocaust, and maybe you'll have something to say about this, because I know we need to talk about this at length on another chit chat. But when we hear about the Holocaust, and whether it's 6 million Jews who died in Auschwitz and all those concentration camps or those work camps or whatever, big movies have been made about this, big stories, we all learn about it in history. But from the book that you suggested I read, which I mentioned a couple of chats ago, called Hellstorm, nobody knows about the 7 million Germans that were killed at the end of the war. There's no movies made about that. And like slavery, there's no movies made about the African people that took other tribes as slaves. So we believe a lot of what we're shown because it's drama and it's exciting to watch. You can sit there with your popcorn, and it's just fed into us, whether it's through the schools or through the media. And that's why doing research, and with this amazing creation of the internet, it's brought so much information. Not all of this is true, obviously, but I think with your research, if you can also remind people how you've got your research, it's just through talking to people? Is it going to conference? Is it reading? Where do you get your facts? Because you always say
it's reading. I think the thing about reading is nothing is as powerful for understanding things as reading long form books. That requires, I'm not exceptional this way. There's some people, I don't read all the time. In fact, back in 2020, I took the decision to stop for 2 or 3 years, and I did because I'd been reading solid for like 25 years, things. And hoovering it up. And in the end, you go, how much more detail do I need? The answer is not much more. This is not arrogance. It's simply, what happens in the news cycle is you're just getting the latest form iteration of the same spiritual battle. You have to read it right. It's like a key. But of course, you can't read it at all if you've not seen all the previous examples. So mental stamina and the ability to concentrate for an hour whilst reading, maybe longer if you're better at that, is a tremendous asset to anyone. It's really important. I don't watch videos at all on YouTube, just to let you know. I don't watch them. That's why I do audio, because I'm busy. And so I'm trying to absorb. I listen to things. I much prefer listening because I've got my own stuff whirring around in the top of my head and I'm integrating it as we go. It's just the way I am at this time. I'm probably pretty stupid when I was 20, but it doesn't matter. This is the way it is now. So what I would say is that after 9/11, just in terms of the history of the movement of popular inquiry, let's call it that. I've just called it that. I don't know what it is, but after 9/11, anybody that was on the net then, I've been on the internet since 1992, so this makes me ancient, right? I was in a place where we had a high-speed internet connection in 1992. The Association of Librarians, right? How exciting does that sound? Turns out, of course, libraries are bloody important, but after 9/11, there was a glut. There were massive news groups, huge email subscription lists built up. It was all about email. I still think email is the killer app on the internet. I'm serious. It's still fantastic. Um, and suddenly, lots of journalists who, up to that point, have been kind of a whole clutch of them, who'd been part of sort of mainstream media, suddenly went, "Hey, there's something really not right with this. There's something really not right with it." And they began to bring their research skills to bear because they're trained into doing that. They had access to, other libraries and documents. They began to find out that they couldn't get hold of certain documents that they wanted to get. And so you get all this writing building up, the whole history of like atomic weapons. Do they really exist? Now you think, well, of course they exist. I saw it in a movie. Do they though? And what it brought about, what's so healthy, is a really clear questioning attitude about everything. Everything, literally everything. You need to question and it's exhausting as well doing that, But I think it's as if God gives you energy when you're committed to finding the truth. And we're not always like that. I take time off too. I do watch movies every now and again, Karen. I do, and I just do it. I go, right, I'm going to air my brain. As far as I'm concerned, they don't have any impact. My only concern is that I spend too much time on it. And the thing about the media is it's not what they put in. It's not what they put in is not necessarily untruthful. In fact, it's got to have some truth in it to have any traction in the mind and hearts of the viewer, the listener. Otherwise, you'd sniff it all. It can't be just wall to wall complete manure, even no matter how much they'd like to do it. It just wouldn't work. It's not what they put in. It's what they never show you. It's what they omit. It's the ability to censor, effectively, in simple terms, the accounts of the losers in war. That's what you don't hear enough of. We don't hear of the accounts of the losers of war. For example, if you go around here in the country and I don't know whether they teach it still in schools, but just to sort of defray it a couple of 100 years. If you go and ask people what their impression is of Napoleon, or you look at the reports of Napoleon, certainly here in England, at the time, there's this evil monster, right? Wants to take over the world and all this, that, and the other. It's a similar narrative to with Hitler. It's almost, in fact, the parallels in their lives are considerable. The way that they were reported upon, they're dictators, they're ruling all the French, they're ruling all the Germans, they're all mindless and all this kind of stuff. It's the same guff over and over again, right? It's nonsense, half of it. And it's not until you look into the accounts of the other side that you get a much clearer view of why all those conflicts took place. And Napoleon is an exceptional individual from history in so many ways. And similar to Hitler, although obviously he's known for his astonishing tactical and military prowess in the field, this is Napoleon. Hitler's not noted for that necessarily. But it's his work on civic matters that's really stunning. And the same, I would suggest, for Hitler. So the view that we are taught to is these were evil men trying to take over the world. It's always this comic book nonsense. It's absolute. But you fall for it when you're young because it's great as well. It makes a really good comic book story. You can make films out of it along that theme, as gazillions of films have been made. But it's missing something. It's all it's a bit too sort of Hollywoody. It misses a lot. And for those that want to look into the life of Napoleon, you get a very, very different view. You find out that he was effectively fighting a whole series of defensive wars to protect the Republic. And he was fighting coalition after coalition after coalition. And these coalitions were funded, organized, and maintained by the money power of the day. Because France, just like Germany did in the 1930s, was demonstrating that it didn't need to be part of their system. It's not to the same degree as Germany did, but this is the case. And there is this very, very important part of British history and world history because of it, which is the Battle of Waterloo, which is not the battle itself, which took place on Sunday, but it's the events on the London Stock Exchange on Monday morning that are in my mind, far more important. I mean, it's a huge battle politically, of course, and it affected things militarily for a long time. But what happened on the London Stock Exchange was that a series of messengers had been stationed right next to the battlefield, not controlled by the British government, but controlled by the Rothschild investment family. headed up at the time by Nathaniel Rothschild in the London Stock Exchange. He'd organized all this. And as soon as they could see that when Blucher's army arrived late in the afternoon and the tide of the battle turned decisively, this is what turned it in the last sort of couple of hours or whatever, they set off like a bat out of hell on these whole chain of horses, express ponies, from Belgium down to a boat across, got back to London overnight, middle of or early Monday morning or whatever, went like an absolute bullet, and gave the information to Nathaniel Rothschild that Wellington had been victorious. So then what happened on the stock exchange that day is there were two teams working for Rothschild. And the first team acted first, and they began to sell all his stock in an overt way so that they could be seen selling it. They were selling the idea that you've got to sell your stock. And all the other traders looked and said, he knows something that we don't. We've lost. Right? Sell your stock. It's going to tank. We're in trouble. This is really, really serious, right? So they all began to sell. And as they sell, of course, the price of these stocks drop. At which point, at some given time, whatever it was, another team then steps in and starts to buy up all this stock, which is now obviously at knockdown prices. And by the end of the day, the calculation I've seen in certain reports is that by the end of the day, the Rothschild family owned 63% of the entire economic productive base of Britain. 63%. At that point, the idea of freedom and democracy in this country was finished completely. It had begun as a process in 1694, actually a bit earlier with the so-called English Civil War. This is why history, you see, history is just stuff that happened not now. It's anything behind us is all relevant, whether they're running around on horses or in fighter planes or whatever. The same principle, I would suggest, is always at work. It's the same sort of thing. And from that point on, you've got the British Empire and all that kind of stuff. There's no such thing, in my view. There's an empire of the City of London, and it used... it press ganged the British men into the Navy and in the Army. It had been doing that before that anyway. The women left at home were sent down coal mines naked in certain to dig out coal. If you've not seen these pictures, who reports our own history back to us? We have nothing on TV because we've got to watch all this crap that's going on from around the world. I always remember my dad saying, when he was watching TV in the 70s, going, are they actually going to give any news about us? No, because the television systems are owned by the same enemy, and they literally bombard you that we've got to be concerned about the welfare of everybody else. And we've been trained to such a degree that people, English people and people of Britain, feel guilty, literally feel guilty about providing empathy and concern for the poor of our own race here in these islands. And there is a considerable number of them. And they are demeaned and trodden down by propaganda in the press. You know, these scum, wherever they are. It's always been like that. Oh, yeah, these working class scum. And they think like that at the top end of the chain here. They've thought like that for a long time. And so our energies have been sent all over the place, depleting us even further, which is all part of this infection, which is to do with this spiritual war, because all you have to do is a bit of research to find out who owns all the mainstream media, who owns most of the banks, who owns most of the investment firms, who set up stock exchanges, foreign currency exchanges, insurance companies, all of that machinery, which is the manipulation of credit and other things within so-called civilization. The bulk of it is in the hands of the money power, let's call it that. And to that degree is the degree to which we're enslaved, and you are enslaved. I mean, we're not.
So Paul,
Yeah.
you amazing. The information you brought to the fore today has been incredible. Some of it's repeated, but I think we need to have it repeated, so because we're all learning here. And those people that are watching, if some of this isn't making sense, please go back to the very first one that we did. I don't know how many of these we've done, but they're pretty close together. And go back and listen to these, and it will all start. All the pieces will start falling together, coming together. One thing what I would like to ask now is, okay, because we're talking about the chosen ones.
This chosenness stuff, yes,
This
chosenness.
the chosenness stuff. So this is really important, I think, because the race, the group of people, whatever it is that are chosen, whoever they are they
Yeah.
different? And what is their responsibility? Are they favored? Are they better than the other chosen, the non-chosen ones? Why are they chosen? And what is their role in being chosen? There you go.
It's a good question. I've likened it to being chosen to do latrine duty because nobody else can stomach it. I'm serious. I'm quite serious. These people, it's like you've got to hold the shitty end of the stick and hit your mate over the head with it. It's not great. Now, the other side make out that what it means is that the sun's going to shine out of our proverbial rear ends, right? And within their writings, they have things like, we're all going to have 2,500 slaves each. This is comical piffle. It's nonsense. I mean, they may bring it about. I don't know if not dealt with properly or it's suppressed. I mean, they ardently believe this stuff, right? It doesn't matter what we necessarily think about it, although you are going to think something about it, as I do. But this is part of the deal. My take on it is that Christianity is a way of life, and there is a particular race of people that have been almost built or are ideally suited for it, which is why they're on the contract. This is why Yahweh calls them his people. His contract is not with all people. It couldn't be, because there'd be nothing exclusive about it. One of these inherent qualities of a contract, of a testament, is it has to be exclusive. Otherwise, you wouldn't even draw it up. There'd be no reason to draw contracts. Oh, anybody can do this job at any time they like if they see this piece of paper and you can step in. It's just a madness. Nothing would get done. So there are certain qualities that they are supposed to be imbued with, but they only come to the fore when they are obeying the law. And if you look at what's happened to Western Christian Europe, it's in a decline because the law, not only is it not being obeyed, it's practically unknown. And this is because of a concerted long-term effort to move it away. We live, you could say to a great degree, we live in the great distractathon, where people are permanently distracted. There's a very funny sketch you ever seen Monty Python's The Meaning of Life? There's a really good sketch in there with the very, very big corporation of America. And they're all sat around this huge table, having a big business executive meeting about all the power they've gotten. And I think Graham Chapman says, now we come to the serious problem of how much there is left to own. They just want to buy up everything. And Michael Palin starts talking about, he said, we've come across two things. The first one is people are not wearing enough hats. I've always liked this, by the way. It's very good. And the other one is that people's concentration is easily broken. They can't concentrate on things. And they play a really good joke. Eric Idle says, well, there's this thing about being distracted. And then he looks out the window, he's completely distracted. It's maintaining focus. We are very easily distracted because we've been studied. So all of the promotion of porn and booze and sport and 8 trillion channels of TV and sit down and gawp at this stuff, it is effectively an extremely comfortable gilded cage. It's a prison. And it's very difficult for many people to get out of it because it's so comfy, But whilst all this comfiness is going on, we are basically weakening in every area. So, I'm for a bit of discomfort. This doesn't make you popular either, I suppose, but there's something about it being rough. We need things to be rough every now and again to be in our skin, to feel life more fully, as opposed to being soporifically seduced into slumber. That's what's happened. Yet again, the good point is that those people with an aptitude and still got a bit of fire in their belly and desire are using the net for the way I think it should be meant, not for online shopping and all this other guff that they brought in. The early days of the internet were just amazing. I will never forget them. It sounds like a sort of, but they were, because there was no censorship. Just anything went. There were flame wars. People would just have a go at one another. It's absolutely brilliant. Unleashed communication. And I'm a complete believer in it. It's not for a government to say we will censor speech. Of course they do. And the Great War down here, whichever nation, race, or political culture you come from, has always been that. It's always between the ruled and the rulers always seek to limit your ability to think. They don't want you to do that. You might come up with an idea better than they've come up with, and they're going to look bad. And that's why a lot of people get killed in history. People get very cross about this. They don't want to lose their power. So it's a bit of a toughie. It's the human condition, I'm afraid. And I would suggest that the laws of the Bible are a way of circumventing, of stopping that, and to produce good kings. I mean, if you were to ask me, what would I rather live under, a democracy or a monarchy? I'm a monarchist. I'm not saying monarchy is perfect, but it's far less worse in my view than a democracy. And when I say that, I don't mean the incumbents that we're currently burdened with. That's not what I mean at all. I just feel that you've got to, of course, the monarch has to be under the laws of God. And in this country, we've had that. We've also had an awful lot of internal strife. And I mean a lot, like off the charts. It's horrific, really, because of this coveting of power. But if you go back 1,000 years, everybody remember that? You know, when you were a kid. If we go back 1,000 years to Alfred the Great, he really was great. He really was. I mean, he just did some great things that made such an impact. He and his daughter effectively pulled all the documents together to create the common law, because they went around all the kingdoms like Mercia and all these other ones, because there's 7 kingdoms, and they gathered in the best of all the laws. And these laws were pragmatic applications of biblical law. They were how it worked out on the ground in England at the time. And it was a great step up. When he finally defeated the Danes or the Vikings at some big battle, I can't remember, they were all expecting to be beheaded, the guys that had lost the battle on the other side, because they'd been raiding down here, you know, for a long time, and pillage and rape and all that kind of stuff had been going on for quite a while. And he didn't do that at all. He invited them to a big feast, and they all became Christians in the true sense of the word. These are magnificent things that, you know, they're very difficult. I would imagine they're almost impossible to do these days because there's no chivalry left between warring parties. It's a disgusting world, really run by spy agencies that have the most power because they're able to undermine the minds of the people that purport to be in control. And they're very good at it.
Are we there? Are we therefore saying that whoever the chosen ones are, it's their fault that the world's in a mess because
it's our fault. You see that we are responsible for drifting away from obedience to the law. And as we have done that, it's got worse. And if you want to read, I mean, it's bad now. Everybody says it's bad. If you want to read something really bad, something much, much worse than this, in my view, go read the book of Jeremiah and see what happens to the Israelites in that. It's extremely disconcerting. The gist of it is this: they will not keep the law. They won't do it, right? They're thriving. They're doing their own stuff. They're poncing about, whatever they're doing. And Jeremiah receives word from God, i.e. an inspired prophet, that he's got to go and tell them to stop because Yahweh is about to lose his rag with them big time. He's had enough. There's terms of the contract. You're not keeping it. It's very important because there's a plan here to unfold down here. I can't tell you what it all is. I don't know, right? But that's what I read it's all about, to actually bring a higher level of life down here, which is achieved through the application of law, morals, ethics, individual responsibility. All of these things are consonant with the finest ideals of Christianity. I believe that. Other people may laugh at that and say it's ridiculous, but so what? That's the intent, and it's still there. And what Yahweh does, he says, if you do not change your ways, I am going to build an army made up of your enemies in the north, and I'm going to let them wipe you out. And he does. That's how heavy it gets. Like you could say, his patience is almost infinite. Now, this could be an apocryphal tale. People say it's myth or whatever, but there's evidence for many of these things. And of course, many people, I mean, my father-in-law was a vicar, right? We got on really well. Lovely guy, really. And we would talk about these things from time to time. And his wife, who had thought she wasn't, because he changed direction in life and entered into it later on. She actually married an advertising executive and then ended up becoming one of those English vicars' wives, right? You know, the ladies at the vicarage and stuff like that. She was wonderful, very bright. She went, okay. So she went off and taught herself Hebrew. She could read Hebrew. She had all these books in the house in Hebrew. And I wasn't really into this then. This was about 10 years before I stumbled into it all, which is a pity, but there we go. And I don't know why I mentioned that. I just thought I'd throw that in really because it's fun stuff. But people say, I remember him saying, and this is common, the Old Testament is a terrible book. It's full of all this death and murder, and it is. But of course, you've got to know who's being murdered. Why are these tribes being wiped out? Why are the Israelites told to go down the road and kill everything that liveth and breatheth? Men, women, children, donkeys, dogs, the lot. Wipe it all out, right? The reason they were being told to do that is that this is part of that Nephilim bloodline, this offspring, yeah, of the fallen angels that interbred with the creations of Yahweh. And they were abominations in the earth. That's why they were being told to go and do that. I mean, there's a lot more on that. It opens up a huge field of other additional and very fascinating study with regards to archaeology and all this kind of stuff. Because I've had people say, this is terrible, that God's evil. He just tells everybody to kill. It just keeps telling them to kill everyone. Yeah. Without the context, you're lost. It's murderous. It's an awful book, because it is, right? Why? And it's because our forefathers did not do that fully that this seed has maintained in the earth, and we've got this trouble. That's one way of looking at it. That's one way of looking at it. Okay, you'll hear other interpretations or other views on it, and I think you should. I think everybody should, because it's always interesting to hear what other people come back with and go, I don't think it's quite like that, and it always makes for good discussion. But the chosenness, it's almost like a police force. It's a terrible phrase, isn't it? Like a spiritual group in one way, but tough as nails. The Israelites are known as Yahweh's battle axe, right? This means that when they're good with Yahweh, they never get defeated. They never do. It's impossible to beat them. There's a bit where it says, that's us, by the way. And when we're weak, we're going to get absolutely chewed up. And I'm not into all this war stuff. I'm just saying what's in the book. These were really combative times, hugely combative. I mean, even in England, up until the Civil War, right? So-called Civil War is organized, of course, by exterior forces and paid for by them. Cromwell was a complete arse. And I'm not even going to back that up. I just don't like him, as you can tell, right? But if you look at, say, the War of the Roses and the Tudors and all that kind of stuff, this is really, there's a lot of stuff has gone on in these islands, which are part of this force. I mean, where I grew up, I'm going slightly off beam here, but where I grew up in Leeds, and I grew up near a battlefield called Towton. It's between where I lived and a place called Tadcaster, where they used to make really good beer. Sammy Smith's and John Smith's beer all came from Tadcaster, Taddy, as we used to call it. And when I was really young, I used to play in these little becks and everything. And at school, everybody would say, yeah, long time ago, those becks ran red with blood for 3 days. And it was like one of these little gruesome stories that you tell each other when you're a little boy, right? Ugh! And all that, that kind of, well, little boys do anyway. We do that kind of stuff. Of course, I found out it was absolutely true. And there's a battle. No one will know about this either. This is just some English history that's massively important, I think. So there's a battle that took place at Towton on this field on Palm Sunday in 1461. And it was Sunday and it was snowing. They started at 6 o'clock in the morning or something, or as soon as light was up, and they fought for 10 hours. 10 hours they fought. At the end of the day, 28,500 men were dead. It's the biggest loss of English life in one day of warfare ever. Bigger than the Somme, right? This is 1461. I went to the battlefield in 2018. You barely even know that it's there. There's no marking of it. There's a little cross in a corner. And it's eerie. It's huge. It's one of the biggest battlefields ever in the history of these islands. And I don't know why I'm talking about this. I just think I just like to talk about it, I suppose. It turns out that Yorkshire, where I come from, the second biggest battle was also in Yorkshire, which is Marston Moor during the English Civil War. These are events that have shaped the nation and are reflective of all sorts of things. So we have been a warlike people. I'm not getting away from that. It's unavoidable. It's absolutely true. I would prefer it if we're not. But there's been a reason that we've defended certain things. And we also have to bear in mind with the history of this nation, the overthrow of the nation from the Normans in 1066. This was serious. This changed the nation huge. I remember being a kid at school up north. And we always went around going, bloody Normans. We didn't even know why we were saying it, right? It was just one of those things in the school playground. Yeah, those bloody Normans, they came over and all that kind of stuff. But there was a connection yet again with our part of the world. If you don't want me to talk about this, we can talk about the history stuff otherwise. I don't know why I've got onto this, but
well, no, I think you're just talking about war, you know, and no, I think it's really
Well, I am.
relevant, you know,
Yeah,
just,
I
yeah,
am, and about history and every
yeah,
single thing.
all linked. Mm,
Like we were talking about the bells, everything links into everything else. There's a thread all
absolutely.
the way through. There's a pattern. Like we can talk about this, then we could talk about the fashion industry and why clothes are so ugly. We could talk about architecture, which is a big thing for me, about why the buildings are so repulsive and hideous and completely devoid of beauty, and the misery that they literally are creating amongst the people that live around them, unbeknownst to them because it's so gradual and small, how uninspiring it all is. All of these things are linked. They're all
But you
linked.
know, just
They're
when you're talking about buildings, that's quite interesting because one member of the royal family, um, yeah, what's his name, Charlie Boy, he went through a phase of saying how ugly the buildings were in the 60s, and he liked architecture. So that's kind of interesting because I don't think he's such a nice guy, is he? So when you're talking about how ugly these buildings are and to depress people
mhm.
and maybe more, why do you think he came along and said, hang on a minute, we're losing our beautiful architecture and it shouldn't be all ugly? What's he just being playing good cop, bad cop sort of scenario?
I don't think so. That's a long time ago. And in fact, everything he said about architecture, I agree with him. All right,
I would agree as
everything
well.
about it.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. He
And
like, you know,
I think he was maybe he was more of a free agent then, and they hadn't called his
maybe,
number in, right?
maybe,
Because he's obviously been roped into becoming an arsehole talking about the WEF and all these other complete
yeah,
nonsense. But
yeah,
no, everything about buildings are massively important. And we know, you know, if you say to people, where do you want to live? You show them a block of flats, or you show them one of those street lanes in the Cotswolds. Everybody says Cotswolds. Why? Because it ticks every box. It ticks
yeah,
what you should be able to get. And so what you live modern architecture is communist architecture. It's
yeah.
designed intentionally to demoralize. And if you hear the architectural critics that design this stuff, it's just like listening to a bunch of imbeciles. They're completely deranged. It's like a convention of the emperor's got no clothes people. They're completely bonkers. They go, oh, we've got all this steel and glass, and this is the form. You hear the language they're talking. And what they need is some bloke from up north with a whippet and a flat cap to say, that's crap, that is. Blow it up, because it's
And
crap.
some pigeons as well, maybe, because
Yeah, and
you
just
have
let the
homing
pigeons
pigeons up
go in
there.
and they can shit all over it. Excuse my language. And let the whippets go to the toilet all over it, because that's all these things are fit for. That guy, the gherkin in London, just needs to be just dismantled. I mean, they're just a joke. The Shard. Ugh.
Yeah,
Have you seen
bit of
this thing
glass.
that they're trying to build in the desert called the
I have,
Line in Saudi
I
Arabia?
have, I have.
Thankfully, it
Yeah,
looks as though they've had to scale back their ideas. It's not an idea. It's just an
no,
imbecilic idiotic thing. And I saw interviews with guys that some British architect was part of the team, right? Talking just complete guff. Oh, space, and you can do everything you want in it. You haven't asked what I want. I don't want any of that. Right?
well,
Everything that you think we want, you've never asked
yeah,
me. I don't want
we
any of
don't
it.
know. And I've met people that have actually worked or are presently working. I've met architects and surveyors that have worked on that creation in Saudi. And it's quite interesting because I was saying Saudi, I don't want to go there the way they treat women. But he was saying, no, actually, it's very interesting. They're encouraging women to go to be part of this new way of thinking and building and being creative.
Hmm.
And they send all their young people to the West, to the universities to get all this knowledge and information, all the engineering, and then take it back and put it to practice. So, but yeah, I think let's leave that we've done a little bit of talking about architecture. I think we should wind down now, purely
Yeah, sure.
because yeah, but how can we wind down?
I think just going on this chosen thing
Yeah,
and reading the Bible right, which sounds arrogant. I don't mean to sound arrogant. I just think it most people have read it wrong. And the reason is the context. And I include myself as an early reader, right? When I was a younger person. Not that I didn't read the Bible when I was in my teenage years, but you hear it in church. I went to church. I was one of the last generations of children whose parents took them along to church of a Sunday. And I didn't really enjoy it, apart from when it got through to the tales about Samson and Delilah and all the big exciting stuff. That was great.
yeah,
As a
yeah.
kid, you love all that kind of stuff. It's fantastic. And my uncle had an illustrated Bible, and we would go there after to go over and see him at Sunday lunchtime. And my mum and dad would be talking with him and my grandma and stuff. And I was just looking at all these big pictures of Goliath. And I remember in this one book, he was like 100 feet tall. And it was like, wow, because it was real to me. I'm like 8 or 9 or something. So
But
I
he
loved all
probably
that. Made a
was. He
huge,
probably was a
yeah,
big giant.
probably was. He probably was. I mean,
Mm,
yeah, well, maybe not 200 feet, but 35, 40 feet. Who knows? They
yeah,
could have been that
because
big.
they existed.
They've found bones to that effect, haven't they? So
They have.
there's lots of wonderfully interesting stuff. But I think people have to do their own research. Maybe when I come along next time, if I can get a little list of books that I think maybe two, something like that, that might be worthy if for those that want to read, just pointing people in a certain direction that could be useful. I've even got I don't know if I mentioned it before. I've got a PDF. I don't know how you would deliver it to people, but we could probably think of a way. I've got a PDF which is called Star Wars. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I know it sounds corny. It came out in 1980s, and it was called that intentionally to tap in onto the Star Wars awareness thing at the time. But it's actually tremendous because the stars it's referring to is the Star of David, which isn't the Star of David, as you know. That's the Star of Remphan or Rempan, and another star, the Star of the Israelite people. And it's Star Wars is the war between these two stars. It's this war that we've been describing, right? It's this war. And what's so useful about it is it's a pamphlet or a mini booklet of about 105 pages. And it's crystal clear. I think it's one of the best introductions I could give to anybody for them to understand things like why the law is the law. It explains contracts and why it's a contract and why it's therefore exclusive. It looks at the identifying marks of these people called Israelites, who are today, I say that Christians are a race of people who used to be called Israelites. It's nothing to do with going to church, right? It's because coming right back to the beginning of the show, is it to do with blood? Yes, it is. It's absolutely to do with blood. Of course, this is the most toxic thing that a white man in England can say, right? Didn't I just say the worst thing ever? Because you're not supposed to do it. But if you look at the race mixed adverts that you see on TV in this country, you can see what is up. Because I think it says, it talks about this in the Bible, about the results of it. It's known as the sin that cannot be forgiven. How about that? I'm just quoting, right?
The
People
sin
might
that
go,
cannot be
"Oh, that's
given.
disgusting." You can It does. It's you've got to be able to confront these sentences and calmly read them and understand that these are. I think these are unchanging principles, and nature and history has shown us this. That if we get too big for our boots, and boy are people big for their boots. I don't mean us, the little people, but the ones at the top, they're just cocky as hell. Oh, we're going to manipulate your DNA and we're going to stick a robot up your bum and we're going to have artificial intelligence and it's all going to be brilliant. You go, yeah, right. Yeah. What? Bill Gates and Elon Musk? Really? Serious? They are. They're deluded. We don't even want that stuff. I just want to have a nice picnic with my family, a nice sunny day. I'm not interested in any of
But
that
saying
crap.
that, Paul, but I must
Yeah.
say this is quite funny. I had a power cut this morning, and last night there was no internet, which is what happens in these sort of countries. So I had to go to a
Right.
friend's to get some internet connection, and I linked into Starlink, which is great. No password, Starlink. So that's what they're
Yay.
using over
Yeah.
there. Well, thank you, Elon. Thank you, Elon. So sometimes he
Well,
helps
they're
us
good
out.
and they're bad, aren't they? They give. I mean, Trump
Yeah.
has been like that. I know we're
Whoa.
coming to the end, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But he's been giving with one hand, saying all the things that we want to hear, things that need to be said, and I'm glad they're being said. But that doesn't mean that you believe in Trump. And then with the other hand, the next day he's just coming out with complete and utter negative,
Yeah.
and it's creating cognitive dissonance in people. Go, what kind of a guy is this?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
he's an actor. That's what he is. And they say these lines on Tuesday, then talk this nonsense on Wednesday. Okay, that's what's
Yeah.
going on.
That's what's
That's
going
what,
on.
and it's all part of this thing. So, I mean, I think in the end, irrespective of what people might want to think about the history of all of these things or whatever, we've got real challenges today. My view is knowing the history of this document is extremely valuable, but only if it's read right. And there's also a lot of occult knowledge in there. And by that, I simply mean hidden knowledge that only gets revealed with serious study. And I think there's a line, is it from St. Paul? Study to show thyself approved. This means reading, being calm, hopefully having moments of the peace that passeth all understanding when you connect up. I bet we've all had moments like that where suddenly everything fits together and it disappears and you go, bugger, back to the washing up. But we do have moments like that. There's aspects in it that are amazing. And Christ's parables are worth looking at because he's revealing this story all the time. I think I mentioned this before. The disciples said, "Why do you speak in parables?" And he says, "Because it's not for them.
Mm.
This means it's exclusive."
Yeah.
People go, "No, it isn't. Jesus loves everyone." No, he doesn't. He does not. He whips money
Oh,
changers for a start.
oh,
So,
yeah.
what? He loves them, does he? People got to grow up. It's completely infantile. The church is a hippy dippy Jesus, and he loves everyone. Hey, peace, man. It's all going to be great. Crap. That book is a ferocious book, and it's for adults, and you've got to go
And
into it with an adult mindset.
I think I know we've talked about it before, and you've obviously thought about it many times about Bible study or translating or just going through the Bible. I think that'd be really a good thing to do somehow. But starting from the beginning, to the end of the Old Testament. I don't even know about the New Testament. I don't think that's a good. But I'm not going to say. Don't come back to me on that one here because I'm trying to wind us down. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, only
It's a
because I've
big
got to get
book,
out my room.
Karen. It's
Yeah, it is.
1,600 pages,
Yeah.
and that's not with the Apocrypha in it. And there's lots of other books. There's a lot to read.
Wow. Well,
It's
maybe
quite a big thing.
I think it is, lad. But maybe there's some way you can make it concise. I don't know. There's got to be a way just to help people like myself to understand it more because now I'm looking at it with new eyes. And I'm a curious person. And I've never really read the Bible.
Yes.
I've alluded to it. I've popped in here, there, and everywhere. But I don't know. Then something comes on the telly, and I watch that. No, I'm joking. But I think it would be a very, very useful thing to do to go through
Well,
bits.
my closing comment here is this. I think doing Bible study would be awful. I could, because it's so big. You really need it in a structured course if that's what you want to do. I've never wanted to do that. What I wanted, I never read it. And I'm so glad I never ever did read it because I knew I had a sense I was going to read it wrong. But it just didn't feel right. But when you get the context correct, once you've identified who the characters and groups are in the play, then you can enjoy the play or at least comprehend it accurately. But without that key, you're not going to comprehend it accurately at all. It's
You just said
impossible.
you've never read it. So hang on, you've come back to read it in a different way. Is that what you mean?
I mean, I haven't sat down and started at Genesis and gone right through to the end. I
Right.
read
Okay.
it all the
From the beginning.
time.
Yes.
I'm familiar with the summaries of it's a big thing. I'm busy. I'm doing all
Yeah.
sorts of other things as well. Apart from which, I don't feel the need to. It's not as if I feel, oh, I'm desperately missing out. It'll come to me in good time. I've read so many books around it that I kind
Right.
of know. And you go, well, there's other people's interpretations. Yeah, that's fine. But that's what I was interested in at that particular time. And some kind of brevity. I mean, the thing to bear in mind as well is this: time is precious. In the past, prior to the advent of technology or communications technology, we go back, say, to the 1800s, Dickens' time, right? The
Yeah.
average working man over here did what? He worked, he went to the pub. If he had some money, he could go to the theatre every now and again, and he read newspapers and
Yeah.
books. That's it.
Yeah.
Reading was massive because that's why they had those penny things. And that's why Dickens, to a great degree, and most of the writers wrote in such elaborate ways. It was to allow people to fill their time up with wonderfully detailed and descriptive language. You either like that or you don't. I love it, to be quite honest. But you have to put a good chunk of your life aside if you're going to read these things. And you look at the size and you go, how am I going to read that? It's sort of 2,000 pages long. Well, slowly, I guess, and in bite-sized chunks. But we've got this brevity, this way of creating concision around these documents, and you have to make your own best decision. You have to accept as well that you might have swallowed some guff and just be prepared to go, you know what, for the last 3 years, I've been completely wrong about that. Thanks for pointing that out to me. And that's cool. But I think broadly speaking, we know the broad brushstrokes. And the main thing with reading the book is, in my view, to be really clear about the context for what it is. And I'm suggesting strongly it's a history book about a race of people, their relationship through a contract with God, their God, Yahweh, what happens to them when they obey the terms, what happens to them when they don't, and certain prophecies that are linked to that about what's to come based on this pattern of behavior. And if we look at what's happening to us today, I would suggest we're nowhere near as strong as we were when we were Victorians, nowhere near as strong. And this is due to encroachments on the law. For example, allowing women to becoming priests. They can't. It's impossible. The law says no. That's that. Done. So it's broken. This is not picking on women. It's also, the feminist movement has been massively damaging to us. It's undermined our strength as a people. And all of this sort of modern guff that most people, it's just complete rubbish. Everything that's progressive and modern is hideously warped nonsense, and it's produced ugly people, many overweight people, listless people, demoralized people, people who don't know what it's all about, and they're literally watching Netflix 24/7. It's not good. It's not aliveness and vigor
It's not.
and individual thought as I consider it to be. So, and this is not to say that the Victorian era was a bed of roses. If you were a peasant over here, it was tough. It was horrible. That's what Dickens is writing about. It was bloody horrible. But the idea of a moral backbone and those old-fashioned values, I've got to tell you, they appeal to me very strongly, because through it, we regain the strength as a people. There's a way to doing things. And we can always improve. But to just dismiss the past it's ridiculous, particularly when most of the treasure is still in the past, and what's been given to us today is just junk. It seems pretty obvious to me, but there you go.
Fabulous, Paul. Thank you so much again. Really incredible. I just love listening to you, and I'm sure our listeners do as well, because they make comments and ask questions, which I try and get to. And likewise, if there's anybody watching this that has a question directed to Paul, put it down there in the description and we will get back to you. So thank you for watching. Thumbs up. What else are you supposed to do? Subscribe, share, and comment. And again, so interesting, Paul. Thank you very much. And I'll see you on the next one, whenever that's going to be.
Lovely.
Yeah, look forward to it already.
Good end to Friday for me. I've enjoyed it.
Good.
Thank you very much, Karen. I love the invitation. I don't get opportunities to talk in this sort of way. I do my own. I do different things in different ways, and it's good for me to refresh myself with this stuff. So I enjoy it very much. You provide a good opening for me, and thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Look forward to the next one.
Okay.